Mirror, mirror on the wall, have I got news for you? This is what you feel like when you finish the mirror work. When you bring up all this stuff, it just brings out the new you in there. It's kind of cool. This is a case study. It's just when you thought you've heard everything when people confess this stuff in the mirror. Sometimes when I'm doing this mirror work, I think about how similar it is to confession. I had a chance to see exactly how similar there are because I taught a group of Catholic nuns in San Diego, California. Most people know that they have their own form of confession. So why I was asked to do a class there, I asked them, and they told me that news had spread from one church to another that there was a layperson acting as the assistant to the Holy Spirit with a new, deeper form of forgiveness, and that it would work with all religious denominations. So since I had a captive audience, they're cloistered, right? That means they can't go anywhere. I felt like I was home free. Anyway, so here's this story. A client says that she can't sleep at night, and her mother has to be in the hallway, her brother has to be in the bathroom, and her sister has to be in the kitchen. And I thought to myself, gee, that's kind of weird. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought that. And then the next night, I said, what happens then? And she goes, the next night they have to trade places. My mother in the hallway, my sister and the brother, and my mother in the kitchen or in the bathroom. And I said, well, how long has this been going on? And she goes, oh, only about 14 years. And I said, 14 years? Honey, you must have had psychotherapy or hypnotherapy or something, right? And she said, oh, yeah, but none of that stuff worked. Now, here's the issue is I only had like 2 months of new decision therapy. I didn't even know what I was doing. I was reading it right out of the book. This is where you just have to ask for guidance sometimes. So the analysis of what happened is that the issue is that her mother, her sister, and her brother were all cremated, and she was moving the ashes from room to room for 14 years before she could go to sleep every night. So like I said, just when you think you've heard everything, you'll always be surprised about what people say. So let's go back and find out what happened. So her right eye tested weak. I asked her to pick a male person that she knew, and she started with a male named Jim. And I said, okay, go ahead, Jim. And she says, I forgive you for misleading my family. Jim, I forgive you for lying to all of us. And I thought, oh, thank God, finally something that's not out of the ordinary, something normal for once. Then she says, Jim, I forgive you for killing all of our friends. You're really freaking evil. You killed my family. And I thought, well, wait a minute here. I was thinking, you must mean emotionally killing, right? And she goes, oh, no, he really killed them. He murdered my family. I said, what? Your father killed your whole family? No, not my father, Jim. Jim, I said. Jim who? And she said, Jim Jones. Mickey and her mother were part of the People's Temple in Jonestown, Guyana. Remember that? When those 900 people drank the Kool-Aid and died? They had started in Oakland, California at the People's Temple, and they had worked there for 5 years, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day at the Oakland Temple. And finally, the father left the family because he couldn't control the wife. And so she wanted to be part of this church and wouldn't listen to the rest of the family. So he left, and the mother and son and daughter were working and earned the way to go to Guyana. The girl was like 11 years old when they got to Guyana. Now, on the day of the massacre, she was out of the compound in town with some adult workers, and she was around, I think I said 11 or 12 years old at the time. And they heard over the radio there was an attack on the compound, and they rushed back to get into the compound, and the authorities were already there, not allowing them to enter. They had to wait outside for 3 days and 115-degree heat. When she was let in, she saw the piles of bodies lying there for 3 days in the sun, stacked 6 to 7 feet high. And in those piles were her mother, her brother, her sister, 2 aunts, and 2 uncles were lying dead. P.S. She had tried to get rid of the cremated remains for almost 14 years that she had them, but she just couldn't. Here's an example. She said that she'd get in the car with the ashes and start driving, And about 10 to 30 minutes later, she didn't even know where she was. Sometimes she'd drive for half an hour and suddenly comes to a city that she didn't even recognize or know where she was. She just couldn't part with the ashes, and this happened over and over. At the end of the 3 days, there's called a new decision therapy flux period, where you're not to do anything or have any judgments. Just treat yourself nice. And she decides that after the 3 days, she's going to take the ashes out again and see if she can find them. And she went to a forest and um, got some amethyst crystals and dug a little hole and lined it with the crystals. And she put the ashes in and made her peace with it after all of that time. She went home later that evening and put a phone call into her father, who had not spoken to her in 22 years, and said, "Hey, Dad, this is your daughter, Mickey. I know that we haven't been on good terms, but I've been working with this thing called New Decision Therapy to change my life, and I think it's time to have a relationship with you." And what they ended up doing was setting up a foundation for the survivors of Jonestown and working with them in the mirror to heal the atrocities that happened there. So if you can forgive that and get over that, and a lot of people blamed God during that time period too. So they were learning about how to forgive God in that particular situation. You'll blame anybody when you're hurt. So that 3 day period, let's talk about that and go on.